I was working the front desk at a beachside hostel in Byron Bay when this guy from Texas rolled up to check in, mid-40s, rental car keys jingling in his hand, already sweating through his polo shirt. He slapped his driver's license on the counter and said, "Y'all drive on the wrong side here, right?" I smiled. Told him, "Yeah, left side of the road, right side of the car." He laughed like I'd told a joke. "Don't worry," he said. "I drove in Boston once. I can handle anything." 3 hours later, he was back, scraped the entire passenger side of his rental on a roundabout pole. Said the roundabout came out of nowhere. I didn't have the heart to tell him there were 6 more between the hostel and town. That same week, a woman from Florida tried to turn left across traffic at a red light. Just went for it. When the local driver honked, she rolled down her window and yelled, "It's a free country!" The Aussie bloke just stared at her. Then he said, "Real slow. Yeah. Free of you turning left on red, mate." She sat there for a full minute, trying to figure out if she'd been insulted. My coworker Jen dealt with an American couple who insisted their GPS was broken because it kept saying roundabout every 30 seconds. They wanted a refund on the car. Jen had to explain that Queensland just has roundabouts, lots of them. The husband said, "Well, that's just poor planning." Jen asked him who he thought should fix it. He didn't have an answer, but that was just the beginning. I'll never forget the morning this American backpacker, maybe 23, came into the hostel kitchen looking like he'd seen a ghost. Sat down with his coffee and just stared at the wall. I asked if he was all right. He said, "I've been here 4 days, and I still don't understand the circles." The circles? He meant roundabouts. Turns out, he'd been treating every roundabout like a 4-way stop. Full stop. Wait, creep forward, panic, gas it. He couldn't figure out why everyone kept honking. I pulled up a chair and drew him a diagram on a napkin. Explained that you yield to traffic already in the circle, then merge when clear. He looked at the napkin like it was written in ancient Greek. "But who has the right of way?" he asked. I pointed to the circle. "Whoever's already in it." He said that seemed dangerous. I asked him how many accidents he'd seen. He admitted none. Then he said, "But it's only a matter of time." The thing is, roundabouts are everywhere in Australia. They keep traffic moving, but Americans see them, and their brains short-circuit. One guy, a business traveler from Seattle, told me roundabouts were undemocratic. I asked what he meant. He said everyone should get a turn, not just whoever gets there first. I explained that's exactly how they work. He said no, everyone should get a turn in order. I told him that's a traffic light. He said exactly. We went in circles for 10 minutes. Bit ironic. I've been documenting these patterns for years. Americans abroad, culture clash, the tiny moments that reveal how we think. If you want more of this kind of field research, subscribe. I publish a new observation study every week, and they don't show up randomly in your feed unless you make sure they do. My favorite roundabout story involves this retiree couple from Arizona. They rented a camper van for a coastal road trip. Sweet people, really, but they hit their first roundabout outside Brisbane and just stopped. Not at the yield line. In the roundabout. Dead center. Hazards. Other cars had to swerve around them. A motorcyclist pulled up and asked if they were broken down. The husband said, "We're waiting our turn." The motorcyclist said, "Mate, you're in the turn." They didn't understand. Eventually, someone called the police. The officer gave them a 20-minute tutorial on the side of the road. When I saw them 3 days later, they'd decided to avoid all roundabouts entirely. They showed me their route. It added 6 hours to their trip. Then there was the digital nomad from Portland. Confident guy. Always talking about how well-traveled he was. He'd been to Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, but Australian roundabouts broke him. He came back to the hostel one afternoon with white knuckles, said he'd done 12 roundabouts in a row and felt like he was in a video game. I told him that was just the road to Noosa. He asked if there was a highway with normal intersections. I said sure, but it's got roundabouts to get on it. He looked genuinely distressed. Later, I heard him on the phone saying Australia had aggressive infrastructure. There was also this woman, maybe late 30s, from Chicago. She'd been driving in Australia for 2 weeks and thought she had it figured out. Then she hit a double roundabout. 2 circles, connected. She entered the first one, fine. Then saw the second one and panicked, tried to exit early, jumped the curb, ended up in a McDonald's parking lot. She came into our hostel restaurant that night and told the whole story to anyone who'd listen. Said double roundabouts should be illegal. One of the locals asked why. She said, because they're confusing. He said, only if you can't read signs. She didn't talk to him again. The weirdest part is how personal Americans take it. Like the roundabout is judging them. This guy from Georgia got so mad after stalling in a roundabout 3 times that he refused to drive anymore, just sat in the passenger seat while his girlfriend drove. She was from Canada and had no problems. That made him even angrier. I was working a shift at a car rental place near Gold Coast Airport when I realized Americans don't actually process what left side of the road means until they're already driving. They nod when you explain it. They sign the papers. They watch the safety video. Then they get in the car, and their muscle memory takes over. This family from Texas, mom and dad and 2 teenagers, picked up their SUV on a Tuesday morning. Dad drove. I watched from the window as he pulled out of the lot, signaled right, and turned directly into oncoming traffic. Lasted maybe 5 seconds before he realized. Swerved back. Sat there in the middle of the road with his hazards on for a full minute. His wife was yelling. The kids were filming. Eventually, he corrected and drove off. But I could see his hands shaking from 50 meters away. The rental company had a policy after that. Americans had to do a practice loop in the parking lot before leaving. Most people appreciated it. One guy from New York said it was insulting. Said he'd been driving for 30 years and didn't need a training course. Manager told him it was required. He did the loop, got halfway around and turned right into a parked car. Not hard, just a bump. But he got out and inspected the damage like it was the car's fault. Asked if Australian cars had different turning radiuses. Manager said, no. Guy seemed unconvinced. I met this study abroad student who'd been in Sydney for 3 months. She told me the left side driving still didn't feel natural. Every morning, she'd get in the car and have to remind herself. She'd taped a note to the dashboard. Stay left. Even with the note, she said she'd drift toward the right lane when she zoned out. Once, she drove for 2 kilometers on the wrong side of a divided highway before someone flashed their lights at her. She pulled over and cried for 20 minutes. Now she just takes the bus. There was this military guy, maybe 30, from North Carolina. He'd driven Humvees in the Middle East, trucks in Germany, confident as hell. He told me driving on the left would be no sweat. I gave him the keys to a sedan. He made it to the exit of the airport before he got confused by a merge lane. Thought the lane markings were backwards. Stopped in the merge lane to figure it out. Got rear-ended by a local delivery driver. The local guy got out, saw the American rental plates, and just sighed. Didn't even yell. just said, "First day?" The American said, "Yeah." The local guy said, "Take the bus until day 3. The most dramatic case was this woman from Michigan, late 50s, traveling solo. She'd done tons of research, printed out guides, watched YouTube tutorials. She was ready. She picked up her car, drove out of the lot perfectly, made it 3 blocks, then forgot which side she was supposed to be on at a T intersection. Turned right, went up a one-way street the wrong way. A taxi driver saw her coming and blocked the road with his cab, got out, and walked up to her window. She thought he was going to yell. Instead, he said, "You're American, yeah?" She nodded. He said, "Follow me." Then he led her, in his taxi, back to the rental place. Didn't charge her. Didn't lecture her. Just made sure she was safe. She told me later she cried in the parking lot. Not from fear, from embarrassment. I was working as a tour guide in the outback, running day trips from Alice Springs, when I started noticing a pattern. Americans would show up with their phones, their GPS apps, their rental car navigation systems. They'd have everything mapped out. Then we'd get 15 kilometers outside town, and their devices would lose signal. That's when the panic set in. This couple from California, both in their 40s, had planned a self-drive trip across the Northern Territory. They had Google Maps, Waze, and a standalone GPS unit. Backup plans for their backup plans. But once they hit the Stewart Highway, the cell signal dropped. Google Maps froze. Waze said, "No route available." The GPS kept recalculating. They pulled over at a roadhouse and asked the attendant what was wrong with their devices. He said nothing. That's just the outback. No signal for hundreds of kilometers. They asked how they were supposed to navigate. He pointed at the highway. "Follow that." They looked at the road stretching into the horizon. The wife said, "But what if we miss a turn?" The attendant said, "There are no turns for 300 kilometers. They didn't believe him. They bought a paper map. Then they sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, trying to figure out how to read it. I had this digital nomad from Austin on one of my tours. Young guy, maybe 25, worked in tech. He got genuinely upset when his phone couldn't pull up directions in the desert, like frustrated to the point of anger. He kept saying his phone was useless. I told him we didn't need phones for the tour. He said, "But what if I want to look something up?" I said we were 40 kilometers from the nearest cell tower. He asked when Australia was planning to fix that. I told him probably never. The outback's too big. He said that was backwards. One of the other tourists, a German woman, said her country had plenty of dead zones too. The American said, "Yeah, but Germany's small." She just looked at him. There was this retiree from Florida, maybe 70, who'd driven all over America with his RV. He figured Australia would be the same. He rented a 4WD and headed out to Uluru with his wife. They had a printed itinerary, a road atlas, and a satellite GPS unit that cost $600. They made it halfway before the GPS tried to route them down a dirt track that didn't exist. The unit showed a road. The map showed a road, but in reality, it was just empty desert. They drove 3 kilometers before the sand got too soft, got stuck, had to call for a tow. The tow truck driver asked why they left the highway. The Florida guy showed him the GPS. The driver said, "Yeah, that road got washed out in 2019. The GPS hadn't updated." The American wanted to know who to complain to. The driver said, "The desert, I guess." This is the kind of story most travel channels miss, because they're chasing highlights, not patterns. I track the uncomfortable truths, the repeated failures, the moments that actually explain how culture works. If that's the kind of analysis you're here for, subscribe. The algorithm doesn't push this stuff. You have to choose it. My favorite GPS disaster involved this honeymoon couple from Colorado. They'd rented a camper van and decided to explore the Kimberly region. Gorgeous area, but remote as hell. Their GPS showed a shortcut between two towns. Estimated time, 90 minutes. They took it. Turns out the road was a 4WD track meant for locals with serious equipment. Their camper van barely fit. They scraped past trees, bottomed out on rocks, got lost twice. What should have been 90 minutes took 7 hours. When they finally made it to the next town, they were furious. They went to the visitor center and demanded to know why the GPS would show that route. The staff explained that GPS units often include unsealed roads. They said that was false advertising. The staff said no, it's just data. They asked if they could sue Google. The staff said probably not. They spent the rest of their honeymoon only driving on highways. Then there was this gap-year traveler from Oregon, 19 years old. First time out of the US, she relied entirely on her phone for navigation. Didn't occur to her that remote areas might not have coverage. She was driving from Darwin to Kakadu National Park, lost signal about 20 kilometers in, started panicking, pulled over and waited for the signal to come back. Sat there for 2 hours. Another driver pulled up and asked if she needed help. She said her GPS wasn't working. He asked if she had a map. She said no. He asked if she knew where she was going. She said Kakadu. He said, "Just keep driving that way." Pointed down the road. She said, "But how will I know when I'm there?" He said, "The signs." She looked so relieved, like she'd forgotten signs existed. I was working the bar at a pub in Margaret River when this American bloke walked in, maybe 55, looking exhausted. He ordered a beer and sat down heavy. I asked how his trip was going. He said, "I've driven in 48 states, never had a problem. But this country is trying to kill me." I asked what happened. He said he'd been driving for 6 days. 6 days of roundabouts, left side roads, unclear GPS directions, and wildlife. Apparently that morning, he'd been cruising down a country road when a kangaroo jumped out. He swerved, overcorrected, ended up in a ditch. Not hurt, just stuck. A farmer pulled him out with a tractor. The American kept apologizing. The farmer said, "It happens all the time." The American said, "But I'm a good driver." The farmer said, "Yeah, but the roos aren't." He told me he'd spent his whole life thinking he was an excellent driver. Won awards in defensive driving courses. Never had an accident. But Australia humbled him. He said it wasn't that the roads were dangerous, they were just different. And he'd assumed different meant easier to figure out. It wasn't. I poured him another beer, told him most Americans go through the same thing. It's not about being a bad driver. It's about unlearning 30 years of muscle memory in a week. He nodded, said he wished someone had told him that before he came. I said everyone does tell Americans that. We just don't listen until we've already scraped a rental car on a roundabout. He laughed, finished his beer. Then he said something that stuck with me. Back home, I thought confidence and skill were the same thing. But they're not. Confidence is thinking you can handle anything. Skill is knowing when you can't. The next morning, I saw him check out. He'd hired a driver for the rest of his trip. Said he wanted to enjoy Australia without worrying about what side of the road he was on. Smart move. I gave him a recommendation for a good driver. He thanked me. Then he said, "Tell the next American who comes through this. The roads aren't wrong. You are." I told him I'd pass that along. I could fill 10 more videos with stories exactly like these. And I will. Because this is what I do. I work the jobs where tourists break down. and I document what actually happens when confidence meets reality. Subscribe if you want the next field report. The people who do aren't here for travel tips. They're here for pattern recognition. Every week, new rentals, new Americans, new roundabout casualties. It's not mean-spirited, it's just reality. Australia's roads don't bend to match American expectations. And maybe that's the lesson. The world doesn't reshape itself for your comfort. Sometimes, you're just the one who needs to adjust.